It's an exciting time to be a Marvel Legends collector, especially if you are an Avengers fan, because this year it is the 60th anniversary of the Avengers and Hasbro's going all out to bring us brand new figures and interesting variants on some of our favourite Avengers characters. And releases are starting to come thick and fast. Last week I looked at Thor and the Destroyer, and this week I have another 2-pack set to look at, and that is of course the Black Knight and Sersi. This is quite exciting because we've never had a Sersi released before, and we also have a brand new variant of the Black Knight based on his 90s appearance. So without further ado, let's take a look at this packaging. Now this will look very familiar to anyone who saw my video last week looking at Thor and Destroyer because it is essentially the same design layout. There's an awful lot of white space here which makes it bright, I suppose. It's a little bit bland, I would say. The packaging is of course completely plastic free, so we do just have this central image here of the two figures, which I believe is digitally rendered. I don't think these are actual photographs of the figures themselves, although they look very, very lifelike, but there's just something about them that just looks a little bit soft, a little bit like it's computer generated to my eyes. But nevertheless, these look quite attractive. Behind them we have this very nice image taken from a famous Avengers cover. I think the issue is 382, but I might be mistaken. This image appears a lot clearer and in full colour on the side panel. I really like this approach. I think this looks really dynamic and fun and interesting, and looks great on display if you decide to put your packaging on your shelf on its side. Conversely, you can flip it, and on the other side we have an image of the two figures. So if you prefer doing this and having the figures on display, then you can do this instead. And then finally, if we flip the packaging to look at the reverse, again, we have this very dynamic image of these two figures. I'm pretty sure these are digital renderings, but again, they look so close to the real thing, it's hard to tell at this stage. But here we have these figures posed, which look really nice and dynamic. There's actually a lot more colour on the reverse of the packaging. I'd say this is more attractive than the front, actually. We can see the various bits and pieces in terms of their accessories that they come with, and behind them we have that sort of blued out roster of the various Avengers that have been involved in the team across the entire 60-year history. So this looks quite attractive, and this is quite nice, I have to say. Now I do have to mention that the card used for this packaging is pretty lightweight. It's almost like paper. Not quite that thin, but you get an idea of what I'm saying. It is plastic free, so of course when you slide out the interior thick card which holds the figures in place, you have to unfold this. There's lots of bits and pieces. The figures themselves are contained in rice paper, and I've complained about this before, but they're a little bit difficult to get back into the packaging once you've removed them. Okay, so let's start off with Black Knight. Now, this is not the first Black Knight figure we've ever had from Marvel Legends. I believe to date we've had 2 in the past, but this is the first time we've seen him in his 90s fatigues. The key difference being, of course, that he had a leather jacket, as was quite popular, part of the trend in the late 80s and early 90s. But I've always really liked this look for Black Knight, probably because this was the version of Black Knight that I was introduced to when I was getting into comics when I was growing up. It may not actually be his aesthetically best outfit, but it's one I have the most affection for, if that makes sense. Now, looking at this head sculpt, I think they've done a really nice job. I think this helmet looks really, really good. I really like there's a bit of depth to it. We can actually see the face underneath. Obviously it's a separate piece, it's been glued on, which looks really good, and I really like the expression, the sort of the angry, sort of angsty expression there, like he's ready to do battle. I think this is really appropriate. I think this works really, really well, and I think the paint apps here, there's a nice bit of gold trim around the edge of the helmet that gives it a sort of metallic feel, which looks really, really nice. The paint apps on the face itself are really well done. However, I'm a little less impressed with the torso, and in particular the jacket, because although the moulding and sculpting is pretty much spot on, I can't really fault this at all. The jacket itself doesn't really have much in the way of paint apps going on. Now there's a little bit on the lapels to give it that leathered, weathered effect, which looks pretty good, but otherwise, you know, we can see there's buttons on here. But there's no paint apps, there's no wash running through this to really accentuate any of the crinkles or creases in the jacket. There's nothing to give it a sense that it really looks like leather, like it has been worn. It just feels very much like a hard plastic, which is exactly what it is. Likewise, if we look at the chest, again, really nice to see the symbol that he's got there. It's painted really nicely and really authentically, which is brilliant. Also the Avengers logo on the top of the shoulder there. But the actual chest itself has no paint washes or texturing or detailing going on in it, which again, it just feels a little bit bare bones, a little bit basic. It just makes the figure feel a little bit unfinished, a little bit cheap. The other issue I have is that the jacket itself is a really hard plastic, so it's not really malleable, it's not very flexible. Not that you would need it to be particularly, but as a texture, it's not the nicest. I would have much rather they'd taken the same approach they did to the Thunderstrike figure, which had a thicker, more rubberized feel to it. They've reused these legs and boots from previous releases. In fact, I think they used them on the previous Black Knight figure, which is absolutely fine and appropriate, of course. But we've also seen these on various Goblin figures across the years. If you are a Spider-Man fan, you'll recognise this from various Green Goblins and Hobgoblins. They've used this sort of chainmail effect on the legs, so you know what to expect here. This is all sculpted in, which is really nice. But again, a real lack of paint apps here, no washes running through them to really enhance this sculpting, to really bring the texture out and the detailing. It's very bare bones. So, moving on to the articulation, he does have a ball joint at the top of the neck there, so he can spin his head all the way around, lean it left and right, and nod it up and down a really healthy distance. So no hindrances here whatsoever, fantastic range of motion. He's got a ball joint in the shoulder, which allows the arms to lift up and out. There's a complementary bicep swivel, which looks pretty authentic. This looks pretty cool, doesn't look too obvious, which is great. There's a double joint at the elbow, and there is a pin swivel at the wrist, so that hand can rotate all the way around and, of course, hinge forwards and backwards. Now, one thing I did want to say is that these hands feel very, very rubbery as opposed to hard plastic. Now, he does have a swivel at the waist, so he can move from side to side. Sadly, there's no ball joint here in the torso, but he does have that ab crunch there, so he can bend forwards and backwards. He has ball joints in the hips, so he can kick his legs out to the side. There is a thigh swivel at the very top of the leg there, so he can rotate that leg around. There's another swivel at the top of the boot cut as well. And the legs, of course, will kick forwards, they'll kick backwards, and there is a double joint at the knee, allowing that lower leg to kick all the way back. And then finally, there is a ankle pivot at the ankle there, so of course the foot can hinge forwards, backwards, and rock from side to side. Now, for a deluxe set like this with a fairly hefty price tag, I would hope that they come with some decent accessories, but both of these figures are quite light. Black Knight just comes with an extra pair of hands, so in total he'll have 2 gripping hands and 2 closed fists, and his sword. And I think this sword is absolutely fantastic. I think they've done a really nice job of it. There's not much detailing or paint apps at all on the hilt, but the actual blade itself has some nice colorization, and it is a translucent plastic. And as you would hope, he has no problem holding this in either of his hands. They grip it nice and securely, and it looks pretty cool and quite effective. And you can definitely strike up some really fun poses with this sword, because I think it's a really cool idea. But sadly, one thing this figure can't do is grip this sword with both hands. I tried and tried and tried. I really wanted to hold it with both hands, because it's long enough for him to be able to get both hands around, but the sculpting and the articulation just won't work together to be able to produce that effect. Overall, I'm going to have to give this figure 3 stars. Now, don't get me wrong, I really like this figure. I think it's a great variant of one of my, beloved characters from the Avengers. I'm really glad we finally got him. This is one I've been wanting for a very long time, actually. So it's been a long time coming, and I think it's perfectly serviceable. It does everything you would expect from a Marvel Legends figure. That said, I do feel like he's been a little bit shortchanged. Certainly in some of the articulation. Why hasn't he got ball joints in the torso, to really increase the movement? We've seen some fantastic innovations lately from Hasbro in this area. We've seen some fantastic releases where things just feel a little bit more smooth, a little bit more seamless in terms of how they look. And here's an opportunity where they could have done something with this, especially with this leather jacket. Now, on that note, I am also not a big fan of the material they've used for that leather jacket. I would much rather they'd used a soft rubber than a hard plastic. And then yeah, I definitely take issue with the fact that it feels like Hasbro are cheaping out a little bit when it comes to the paint apps. They're not putting washes on these figures, and they really should, especially when they're special sets like this. I feel like they warrant a little bit more TLC. And my final criticism would be that although the accessories we've got are perfectly adequate. Of course, we have to have that sword. It's great to have an alternative set of hands, but I wish they just pushed the boat and gone one step further. If they just included an alternate head, maybe a helmetless head of Dane Whitman, then that would have been really, really cool. It's something I don't think we've ever had, and it would have been really, really appreciated, and something that would have separated this release out from previous ones. Okay, so next up we have Sersi. This is quite exciting because this is a debut of another character in the Marvel Legends universe that we've never had in the Marvel Legends line before. So this is really, really cool. Really appreciate them taking the time out to do this and offer us a brand new character. And I have to commend Hasbro for doing a fantastic job with this head sculpt. I think this head sculpt is amazing. This is very, very striking. They've really caught this and nailed this likeness pretty much exactly as I would anticipate. It's very beautifully done. And I'd go as far as to say, of all the female characters that they've ever produced, this is the most striking. I think this is really very, very attractive. And there's some nice paint apps on the face itself, particularly the lips and under the eyes there. The eyes themselves are really detailed and really nicely applied, so I give them top marks for this all round. The only minor criticism I would have is of the hair. The hair itself is sculpted fine, but there's no paint apps here, there's no wash running through it to give it that depth and texture and highlights and things like that, so it is just produced in that base plastic mould, unfortunately. Sadly though, from this point onwards, in my opinion, things go off the rails. I'm sure a great many of you have already spotted that this body mould has been recycled from many other female figure releases in this line previously. It is that very basic bare bones approach where they've essentially just painted in the costume, painted in the details, as opposed to sculpting them in. Don't get me wrong, it's not the end of the world, it's still really great to get this character and this figure out there, but I do feel that when you're releasing a specialist set like this, it would be nice if the figure felt more unique, more individual, and had some specialist sculpting to really feel authentic. As it is, this just feels like Hasbro are cutting corners to get cheap and fast, easy releases. I don't think there's anything new about this figure apart from the head sculpt. I'm pretty sure we've seen all of these pieces before. I've never been a huge fan of this leather jacket approach either. It's a very hard plastic. It works fine. It's not a huge problem, but you know, at the same time, it doesn't feel soft. It doesn't have the nice texture that I would like. The belt, we've seen this accessory many times before. It is loose. This is good. This actually gives it an extra layer, a bit more depth, but as I said, it's not original. Likewise, there's not much new about the legs. Possibly the kneecaps might be a new piece that's been stuck on. I'm not entirely sure whether we've seen them before, but otherwise, these are the same legs we've seen on various other figures before. The only thing I would say is that, again, this figure feels very rubbery in terms of the joints and the plastic they've used, which makes me a little bit dubious about posing them. There's the sense that they might tear and things like that, which I'm never a huge fan of. But also, I noticed with mine, the right leg is actually warped, particularly in the ankle area, which makes it very difficult to pose. Now, looking at articulation, she does have a ball joint at the top of the head, but really all she can do is move it from side to side. That plastic hairpiece combined with that plastic collar means she's not going to be able to lean it left and right, and she can't really nod it up and down either. She does have ball joints in the shoulders, so the arms will lift up and out, but you will notice they've opted for the pins in the arms at the elbow rather than those double joints that we've seen recently from Hasbro. So it's really disappointing that they've adopted an older, more retrograde step here. This is disappointing to see, but of course that lower arm will rotate all the way around. It will hinge to 90 degrees. There is a pin swivel at the wrist, so again the hand rotates all the way around and hinge forwards and backwards as you'd expect. Now there is a ball joint in the chest, allowing the figure to move from side to side, lean left and right, a really healthy distance, and bend forwards and backwards. And this is perfectly serviceable. I think this works really quite nicely, so I have no real complaints here at all. Now she does have ball joints in the hips, the legs will kick out to the side. There is a complementary thigh swivel, which is great, so you can move that leg around. And then of course the legs will kick forwards, they'll kick backwards. There's double joints at the knee, so that lower leg can kick all the way back. And then there is finally an ankle rocker at the bottom there, so the foot can hinge forwards and backwards and swivel from side to side. Accessories wise, again, Sersi is pretty light. She does come with an extra pair of closed fists, and then she has two sort of energy flame ball effects as well. But once again, pretty sure these are recycled pieces. I don't think there's anything new here. Now the pieces work well enough. You can stick them on the end of her fist and it looks like she's throwing these energy balls around, which looks pretty cool. And I think overall, this is quite a nice looking figure. But again, real lack of paint washes, real lack of paint apps on this figure to add a lot of texturing and depth. And overall, I'm going to have to give this figure another 3 stars because as much as I really like having this character, and I think it's a perfectly functional, perfectly attractive figure to have in the collection, it's not really doing anything new here. It doesn't take advantage of some of the new innovations that Hasbro have been making in this line with other releases, and it just feels a little bit bare bones. It just feels like Hasbro cutting corners a little bit here, and it's a real shame because, you know, there's a potential for this set to be really exciting. I was really excited to get my hands on both of these figures, and I think that's my overall impression, is that this set is really just going to be for die-hard collectors, ones who really want to have the full lineup of every character and every variant of their Avengers in their collection, or for those who grew up specifically reading about these characters and have a real warmth and affection for them. Or the mass audience, I suspect, especially those who have to pick and choose between releases like myself, might well pass on this one, which is, you know, a shame, because I think this has had potential to be a really exciting set if they just pushed the boat out a little bit more and just innovated a little bit more with these characters. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.